I sat in my armchair, holding the phone and staring at the lottery ticket on the table next to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. My son, John, had ignored me for 15 years. I had given up hope of ever hearing from him again. But then, out of the blue, he called me. I was hesitant to answer, but something told me to pick up the phone. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice sounding nervous and hesitant. I was taken aback by his sudden interest in talking to me. What did he want? As we talked, I realized that he had found out about my lottery win. He wanted to know if I would help him out financially. I was torn. Part of me wanted to help him, but another part of me was angry that he had ignored me for so long. As we continued to talk, I realized that my son was in deep financial trouble. He had accumulated a debt of $250,000 and didn't know how to pay it off. I was shocked by the amount of debt he had accumulated. How had he gotten himself into such a mess? As I listened to my son's story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. Had I failed him in some way? But as I looked at the lottery ticket on the table next to me, I realized that I had a chance to make things right. I could help my son pay off his debt and start fresh. But at what cost? Was I just enabling him by bailing him out financially? I decided to take a step back and think about my decision. I needed to consider what was best for both of us. As I sat in my armchair, staring at the lottery ticket, I knew that I had a difficult decision to make. But I was determined to do what was right. As I sat in my armchair, staring at the lottery ticket, I couldn't help but think about the past. I remembered the day my son was born, the first time he smiled, his first steps, his first words. I remembered the countless nights I had spent worrying about him, the countless days I had spent working to provide for him. But most of all, I remembered the day he left. He was 18 years old, and he had just graduated from high school. He had always been a bit of a rebel, always challenging authority and pushing boundaries. But I had never expected him to leave. I had tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but he had refused to listen. He had packed his bags and walked out the door, leaving me with a sense of emptiness and despair. Years had passed since then, and I had heard nothing from him. No phone calls, no letters, no visits. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. But now, he was back. And he was asking for help. I couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and resentment. Why had he ignored me for so long, only to come back now when he needed something? Why had he not even bothered to call or visit in all these years? But as I looked at the lottery ticket, I knew that I had to put my feelings aside. I had to think about what was best for both of us. I decided to call a lawyer, to get some advice on how to handle the situation. The lawyer told me that I had to be careful, that I had to make sure that my son didn't take advantage of me. "He's been ignoring you for 15 years, the lawyer said. "Why should you just hand him a bunch of money now?" I knew that the lawyer was right. I couldn't just give my son the money without making sure that he was going to use it responsibly. So I decided to make a proposal to my son. I would give him the money, but only if he agreed to certain conditions. First, he had to agree to go to therapy, to work through some of the issues that had driven him away in the first place. Second, he had to agree to get a job, to start taking responsibility for his own life. And third, he had to agree to regular check-ins with me, to make sure that he was staying on track. I knew that it was a lot to ask, but I also knew that it was necessary. I couldn't just hand him the money without making sure that he was going to use it wisely. I called my son and explained the proposal to him. He was hesitant at first, but eventually he agreed. I was relieved, but I also knew that this was just the beginning. I had to make sure that my son followed through on his promises, that he didn't just take the money and run. I decided to set up a system of checks and balances, to make sure that my son was staying on track. I would give him a certain amount of money each month, but only if he met certain conditions. It was a lot to handle, but I was determined to make it work. I was determined to help my son, to give him the chance to start over. But as I sat in my armchair, staring at the lottery ticket, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if my son didn't follow through on his promises? What if he took the money and ran? I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the present. I had made a decision, and now I had to see it through. I took a deep breath and stood up, the lottery ticket still clutched in my hand. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it head on. I walked over to the phone and dialed my son's number, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but I was determined to see it through. "Hello," my son said, answering the phone. "It's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. I've decided to give you the money, but only if you agree to the conditions I laid out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could feel my son's hesitation, his uncertainty. "Okay," he said finally. "I agree. I'll do whatever it takes to get back on my feet." I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Maybe this was the start of a new chapter in our lives. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That something was waiting in the shadows, waiting to pounce. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on the present. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, that I was making a mistake. I looked at the lottery ticket, still clutched in my hand. It was a symbol of hope, of new beginnings. But it was also a reminder of the risks that lay ahead. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my nerves. I knew that I had made a decision, and now I had to see it through. But as I walked away from the phone, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. As the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. My son had agreed to the conditions, but I couldn't help but wonder if he was truly committed to changing his ways. I had always been a bit of a worrier, and this situation was no exception. I found myself constantly thinking about what could go wrong, about what my son might do to betray my trust. I knew I had to try to relax, to trust that my son would follow through on his promises. But it was hard to let go of my doubts. I started to notice little things that made me uneasy. My son would call me at odd hours, asking for money or favors. He would show up at my doorstep unannounced, expecting me to drop everything to help him. It was as if he thought that just because I had agreed to help him, I was now at his beck and call. I tried to talk to him about it, to set boundaries and remind him of our agreement. But he just brushed me off, telling me that I was being paranoid or overreacting. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells around him, never knowing what he might do next. And then, there were the strange phone calls. I would answer the phone, and there would be no one on the other end. Or, I would get calls from numbers I didn't recognize, with people asking for my son. It was as if someone was watching us, waiting for us to slip up. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that I was just being paranoid. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I started to notice strange things around the house, too. Doors would be open when I knew I had closed them. Papers would be scattered around the room, as if someone had been searching through them. I knew that my son was struggling with his addiction, but I couldn't help but wonder if he was involved in something more sinister. I tried to talk to him about it, to ask him if he knew anything about the strange occurrences. But he just denied it, telling me that I was crazy or imagining things. I was at my wits' end. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. And then, one night, I received a mysterious package in the mail. It was a small box, with no return address and no indication of who might have sent it. I opened it, and inside, I found a note that made my blood run cold. "You're making a big mistake," it read. "Your son is not what he seems." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Who could have sent this note, and what did they mean? Was my son involved in something that I didn't know about? I knew that I had to get to the bottom of this, to find out what was going on. But as I looked around the room, I realized that I was completely alone. My son was gone, and I had no idea where he was or what he might be doing. I was left with nothing but my doubts and my fears. And the mysterious note, which seemed to mock me with its cryptic message. I knew that I had to take action, to do something to protect myself and my family. But what could I do? I was trapped in a situation that seemed to be spiraling out of control. And I had no idea how to escape. I sat in my chair, staring at the note in my hand, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. Who could have sent this, and what did they mean? Was my son involved in something that I didn't know about? I felt a chill run down my spine as I thought about all the strange occurrences that had been happening. The phone calls, the mysterious visitors, the feeling of being watched. It was all starting to add up, and I was starting to suspect that my son was involved in something much bigger than I had initially thought. I decided to investigate further, to try to get to the bottom of what was going on. I started by looking into my son's past, trying to find any clues that might lead me to the truth. I talked to his friends, his acquaintances, anyone who might have known him. But the more I dug, the more I realized that my son had been living a double life. He had been telling me one thing, but doing another. I felt a wave of anger wash over me as I realized that I had been lied to. My son had been using me, manipulating me into giving him money and support. But for what? What was he involved in that was so big, so secret? I decided to take a closer look at the note, to see if I could find any clues. I turned it over, studying the handwriting. It was messy, scribbled in a hurry. But there was something familiar about it. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it seemed to spark a memory. I sat back in my chair, trying to think. Where had I seen that handwriting before? And then, it hit me. I had seen it on a piece of paper that my son had left on the kitchen table a few days ago. It was a note, a reminder to himself. But what did it say? I jumped up from my chair, rushing to the kitchen to look for the note. I rummaged through the trash, but it was gone. I must have thrown it away. But I remembered the words. It was a phone number and a name. Meet me at the old warehouse at midnight. J. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the truth. My son was involved in something big, something secret. And I was starting to suspect that it was something illegal. I decided to do some more digging, to see if I could find any more clues. I started by looking into the phone number, trying to see who it belonged to. But it was a dead end. The number was unlisted, and I couldn't find any information about it. I was starting to get frustrated. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall at every turn. But I refused to give up. I was determined to get to the bottom of this, to find out what my son was involved in. I decided to take a different approach, to try to gather more information. I started by talking to my neighbors, seeing if they had seen or heard anything suspicious. But they all seemed to be in the dark, just like me. I was starting to feel like I was in over my head. I didn't know what to do, or who to turn to. But I knew I had to keep pushing forward. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it took. I sat back in my chair, trying to think. What was my next move? Where could I go from here? And then, I heard a knock at the door. It was a soft knock, hesitant. I got up to answer it, wondering who it could be. I opened the door, and was surprised to see a woman standing there. She was tall, with long blonde hair and a kind face. But there was something in her eyes that made me pause. Something that made me wonder if I could trust her. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "I'm looking for John," she said, her voice soft. "I need to talk to him." I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Who was this woman, and what did she want with my son? I decided to play it cool, to see if I could get any information out of her. "I haven't seen him," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "But I can take a message." The woman hesitated, looking around nervously. And then, she leaned in close. "Tell him I'm looking for him," she whispered. "Tell him it's urgent." And with that, she turned and ran, disappearing into the night. I was left standing there, feeling confused and scared. What was going on? And what did this woman want with my son? I stood in the doorway, watching as the woman disappeared into the night. I felt a sense of unease wash over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Who was this woman, and what did she want with my son? I tried to think back to our conversation, but it had been so brief. She had seemed nervous and on edge, and her words had been laced with a sense of urgency. I decided to go back inside and try to gather my thoughts. As I sat back down in my chair, I couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. I was no closer to finding out what was going on, and now I had even more questions. I thought about the woman's words, trying to decipher their meaning. Tell him I'm looking for him. Tell him it's urgent. What did she mean by that? Was my son in some kind of trouble? I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered in the back of my mind. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. As I sat there, trying to think, I heard a noise coming from outside. It was a faint rustling sound, and it seemed to be coming from the bushes near the front door. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized that someone might be lurking outside. I slowly got up from my chair and made my way to the door. I peered out into the night, trying to see if I could spot anyone. But the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole, and I couldn't see a thing. I stood there for a few moments, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I heard the sound again. This time, it was louder, and it seemed to be coming from the side of the house. I felt a sense of fear wash over me as I realized that someone might be trying to break in. I quickly locked the door and moved away from the window. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to protect myself. I thought about calling the police, but something held me back. I didn't know if I could trust them, and I didn't know if they would be able to help. As I stood there, trying to decide what to do, I heard the sound again. This time, it was louder than ever, and it seemed to be coming from right outside the window. I felt a surge of fear as I realized that someone was trying to get in. I slowly backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I heard a voice. It was a low, gravelly voice, and it seemed to be coming from right outside the window. "Let me in," the voice said. "I need to talk to you." I felt a sense of terror wash over me as I realized that someone was trying to break in. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to protect myself. I slowly moved away from the window, trying to think of a plan. And then, I heard the voice again. "Let me in," it said. "I'm not going to hurt you." I didn't know if I could trust the voice, but I knew I had to do something. I slowly made my way to the door, trying to decide what to do. And then, I heard the voice one more time. "Let me in," it said. "Please." I hesitated for a moment, wondering what to do. The voice on the other side of the door seemed insistent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I slowly turned the lock and opened the door, peering out into the darkness. The figure on the other side of the door was shrouded in shadows, making it impossible to see their face. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure stepped forward, revealing a tall, imposing man with a rugged jawline and piercing blue eyes. He was dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans, and a motorcycle helmet hung from his hand. "My name is Jack," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I've been sent to talk to you about your son." My instincts screamed at me to slam the door shut, but something about Jack's demeanor stayed my hand. He seemed genuinely concerned, and his eyes held a deep sadness that made me want to trust him. "What about my son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jack hesitated, glancing around the yard as if he was worried about being overheard. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should trust this stranger. But something about Jack's demeanor put me at ease, and I stepped aside to let him in. As he entered the house, I noticed that he was limping, and a large bruise covered one side of his face. "What happened to you?" I asked, concern etched in my voice. Jack smiled wryly, rubbing his jaw. "I had a run-in with some of your son's associates," he said. "They didn't take kindly to me asking questions." My heart sank as I realized that my son was involved with some shady characters. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down my spine. "What do you know about my son?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack's expression turned serious, and he sat down in the nearest chair. "I know that he's in deep trouble," he said. "He's been involved with some bad people, and they're not going to let him go without a fight." I felt a wave of fear wash over me as I realized the truth. My son was in grave danger, and I had no idea how to help him. Jack seemed to sense my distress, and he reached out to place a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm here to help. I've been tracking your son's associates for weeks, and I think I can help him get out of this situation alive." I looked at Jack, searching for any sign of deception. But his eyes were sincere, and I believed him. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get my son out of this mess after all. But as I looked at Jack, I saw something in his eyes that made my heart sink. A flicker of doubt, a hint of uncertainty. And I realized that even Jack wasn't sure if we could save my son. As I looked into Jack's eyes, I saw a mixture of determination and uncertainty. He was willing to help me, but he wasn't sure if we could succeed. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would trust Jack, and together, we would try to save my son. With newfound determination, Jack and I set out to gather evidence and build a case against my son's associates. We worked tirelessly, following leads and gathering information. And slowly but surely, we started to build a picture of the people involved. It wasn't easy, of course. We faced obstacles and setbacks at every turn. But Jack's expertise and my determination kept us going. And finally, after weeks of hard work, we had enough evidence to take to the authorities. The day we went to the police station was a tense one. I was nervous, but Jack was calm and confident. He had dealt with situations like this before, and he knew exactly what to do. As we sat in the police station, waiting for the officers to review our evidence, I couldn't help but think about my son. I had been so angry with him, so hurt and betrayed. But now, I just felt a deep sadness. I had failed him, and he had paid the price. But as I looked at Jack, I saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could still save my son. Maybe we could still turn things around. And then, the officers came back with the news. They had reviewed our evidence, and they were willing to take action. They would arrest my son's associates, and they would do everything in their power to bring them to justice. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had done it. We had finally done something to help my son. But as we left the police station, I saw my son. He was standing on the sidewalk, looking at me with a mixture of anger and shame. And I knew that he knew. He knew that I had finally found out what he had been doing. I felt a surge of emotions. I was angry, hurt, and betrayed. But I was also relieved. I was relieved that it was finally over. And as I looked at my son, I saw the person he used to be. I saw the person he could be again. And I knew that I would do anything to help him. I took a step forward, and my son looked up at me. He saw the tears in my eyes, and he saw the love and the forgiveness. And he knew that I still loved him, no matter what. And in that moment, something changed. My son looked at me, and he saw the truth. He saw that I loved him, no matter what. And he knew that he didn't have to be a slave to his addiction. He took a step forward, and I opened my arms. I hugged him tightly, holding him close. And as we stood there, I knew that we would be okay. We would face the challenges ahead, and we would overcome them. Together. The days that followed were difficult, of course. My son had to face the consequences of his actions, and he had to work hard to overcome his addiction. But he did it. He worked hard, and he succeeded. And as I looked at him, I saw the person he used to be. I saw the person he could be again. And I knew that I had finally found my son again. The people who had hurt my son, who had taken advantage of him and used him for their own gain, they were brought to justice. They were punished for their crimes, and they were held accountable. And as I looked at them, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I felt a sense of karma. They had hurt my son, and now they were paying the price. But as I looked at my son, I felt something even stronger. I felt a sense of love and forgiveness. I forgave him for what he had done, and I loved him for who he was. And in that moment, I knew that we would be okay. We would face the challenges ahead, and we would overcome them. Together.